Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm here today again for the third round with Mark Strough. He's been an excellent guest on my show, and I've been very excited to speak to him in such a regular sort of basis, and we've been able to cover some things which are perhaps quite useful for the carnivore bodybuilding kind of physique development space. And today what I wanted to talk with Mark about was the side of things that people don't mention often enough, and that's the hunger cues, listen to your body and that sort of thing. Because, people will say, listen to your body, do this, that, and the other. But what does that actually mean? Like, how do we know that we're listening to the right signals versus the wrong signals? I mean, I could say right now, like, I'm not that hungry at them. I could say, well, I fancy that, bag of Skittles in the cupboard or something. Do I actually need to follow that hunger cue or not? So this is what I want to cover today. Do you have any thoughts on that sort of topic, Mark, to start?
Well, I think maybe that's one of the things that probably is understood, not talked about as much, but those things are all critical. It's kind of you need to have the proper eating and the proper working out, but there's also other intrinsic things that are important.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that sometimes we can be overzealous we're trying to build lots of muscle. We all get these ideas in our head where we're like, oh, we want to gain 10 pounds of muscle this year, or we want to do more in less time as well, which is quite incredible. But the thing is, when we're doing that, we're thinking we're going to be adding, 50 grams of protein per meal, or, all these absurd amounts of extra food. And I'm not sure how appropriate it is now, because I've tried all these things and I've tried all the hacks you can think of. It doesn't seem to work. And have you experienced the same sort of thing, Mark? Have you noticed that when you're trying to build more muscle or add more strength, do you find that you're just kind of chasing your tail a bit when you're trying to increase food intake beyond a certain amount?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, that's when people are actually in the bulking type phase. A lot of times the bulking we're doing is probably not as much muscle as we're putting on fat. Sometimes I know that's a hard balance. That's a hard thing. And sometimes I see bulking as an excuse just to eat a lot more food. And you are going to increase body fat. That's fine. But when somebody, say, if they're normally going to be in the 10-12% range, and they say, well, I'm going to go into a bulking phase, and they're kicking up to 20-25%, I think it's a lot of hand. The time you do your cutting, what is your net? Did you net enough muscle to really make it worth it? And some people have to go crazy extremes to go back into the cutting phase. And I really don't know how healthy that is for a person to be chasing, like you said, chasing muscle and then having to chase the leanness and stuff. It's a fine balance. And I know, as in what you do as a professional bodybuilder, that's something you have to deal with regularly. And as mere mortals, it's not as important. But again, keeping good quality muscle mass is on. But sometimes, and I think if you're an experienced lifter, and of course I'm just slightly older than you, but I'm almost 54. I'll be 54 by the time this video comes out. I've been training for many decades. It's almost like chasing the illusion of gains. And I think I've said this before. I could have a goal this year that I'm going to put on as a natural 54-year-old. I'm going to put on 10 pounds of muscle this year. That seems really doable, and it would be very difficult. Now, if I was a newbie, had never stepped foot in the gym, or I've been out of the gym and not in good health for many years, or fitness, I should say, fitness level, and I come in as a novice, that's very doable. And I think that is one of the things that's really hard to understand is somebody, they get these gains early on. And, somebody first starts working out as a novice, most of the strength gains are experienced in the first few weeks and even few months is a neurological efficiency. You're just getting more efficient. Your nervous system knows how to fire the muscles properly. And so you're gaining that. Yeah, you are gaining strength, but later on that levels off. That's when people hit the plateaus. That's when, look, I'm trying everything you hear, and nothing works. I'm just stuck right here. And that's actually normal. And there's ways of breaking through that. But I think we always want to chase that. And you have to change your metrics, I think, sometimes when you're a more experienced lifter and older and been doing it for a while. And so it's call it the chasing the illusion of gains. There's other things. How's your intrinsic things? How's your cardiovascular fitness. If you want to measure that through VO2 max, if you want to measure just, hey, I walk, up, 5 flights of steps and I wasn't out of breath. I can do this around the house or the yard. I'm fine. I can go ride my bicycle. I'm good. I mean, there's other ways to measure it. How are you sleeping at night? How is so many other things? How is your emotional, mental wellness going? So there's a lot more things maybe than just looking at the pure muscle mass, because eventually you hit a roadblock there. And same thing on strength. We always want to go back to Milo lifting the cow above his head and everything. That's great. That is a progressive strength, and that is one of the goals. But I've been lifting since I was 10. So I mean, I really, if you were progressing at a linear rate, I mean, I should be able to go out there and bench press a couple of buses, and that's not happening. You have a genetic limit that you can reach, and it's hard for people to understand that. So you always need to be progressing. And I mean, you don't want to get a plateau and stay there, of course. And you can't just maintain. It's not like our organisms either get better or they get worse. They just have a hard time with the homeostasis sometimes, staying there.
Yeah, you brought some really good points there. Especially about like busting plateaus, because I mean, I probably like yourself built most of my muscle in the first 4, 5, 6 years of training quite handedly, quite easy. Didn't have to really struggle too much. Now, the last 10, 20% of the muscle that I've built up since that time, I've had to work hard on. And I mean,
much harder.
Everything becomes more important. Obviously, I can just stuff food down my neck and I can get 35-inch thighs, like probably a month or two, just get fat. I'll be 25 stone, whether that's in pounds, I don't know, 320 or something. But when that fat comes off, you're not revealing anything extra. Then you're dealing with health consequences as a result of that. So I think you've got the right approach there, and it's just adding onto the layers and building up that mountain. So it's just a case of eating a bit more. I mean, I come from obviously the point that I'm trying to build very large amounts of muscle. That's my primary focus in bodybuilding. The problem is when you're doing that beyond the natural limits, you have to force it to some extent. By forcing it, you can have health complications. I mean, how significant do you think is like the diet at the stage versus the training or the recovery or everything else? So do you think that diet is still the most important thing to be measuring and changing, or do you think you need to be more all-encompassing with different modalities?
Okay, so like on the say that one more time. I was cut out right there. Okay, there you are. You were cutting out just a little bit. Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. So how important is the diet side of things when you're really trying to bust plateaus versus using all the other modalities?
Yes. Yeah, it's critical. The way you eat is the most important thing. I mean, the training, it's got to be there, of course. But, if you don't have your diet tuned in, I mean, very, 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 very close to optimal levels, it's hard to break those plateaus. You're not going to put on the muscle mass that you're wanting. You're not going to gain the strength that you're wanting. You're definitely not going to have the fat loss. We and everybody, I'm sure here listening to this, they understand the dynamics of fat loss to some extent, but it's almost impossible to work out bad eating. And I mean, you'd have to be we used to say Michael Phelps, it was, 15,000 calories or something a day that he was ingesting, or something like that was said when he was training. So that's not something that a mere mortal is going to do. So you've got to definitely keep your eating right on point. With clients I train, the ones that keep their eating in check, they keep it good pretty much year round. I mean, I'm not saying they're perfect; they don't have to be perfect, but the ones that do that, they have so much of an easier time without getting the plateaus. And when they get the plateau, they can break through it, whether that be on the side of gaining muscle or whether it be the side of fat loss. So it's definitely key, and I think it's definitely underappreciated. And unfortunately, many of the big social media people and magazines and all these muscle building websites, they want to more or less say it's all through supplementation, basically. And they try to sell this supplement and this supplement for this magical weight loss or to break through a plateau, and most of that is just pure junk.
Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties here, so probably watch this in the feedback and see what's going on. Yeah, I think that there's lots of different ways to get better, but your diet has to be spot on. The other thing is, well, like, I find breaking past plateaus very difficult. There's lots of things we can do, lots of levers we can pull. But what do you use with your clients to get better? Like, say they're at their, near their peak natural limit. What are they focusing on? Are they focusing on training, or is it diet entirely, or recovery?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I found that once clients, especially have been training with me for some time, so when they hit a plateau, a few things. I mean, I will definitely throw in a few novel exercises, maybe something they hadn't done in a few months. That definitely will help out. I think when you're doing, a pretty much even an A, B, and C routine, throw in something that they don't normally do. So I think that definitely helps out. Also, it's not about adding; sometimes it's about subtraction, and I know that is a hard concept because we're always more of this, more of that, and sometimes we talked about it briefly last time. They may need a week off. They may need a deload of some sort. I may need to reduce their volume down. I may reduce their volume down to a very, very low level, still very high intensity. And then also on the eating, I mean, I've had some that have had good luck. They'll throw in, they'll just do some fat fasting or just actual fasting. Fat fasting is where they're still getting some, like maybe broth, but they're loading up with a lot of, ghee or butter. And they'll do that for just a little bit, just kind of, put a shock to the system there. And we've had some good luck with that as well. But I think a combination of different things with the eating stuff. Also, being not all my clients are carnivore, but most of them are in that realm. We may have a day or a couple of days where they do a very high protein approach. And again, if you're in the carnivore realm, you're always getting high proteins, but a higher approach and less fat. And we'll have some days where they do a much higher level of fat. Everybody has a sweet spot on that. Some people do better and more, like what I do is more of a higher fat carnivore version, whereas some do better with a higher protein, lower fat approach. And then alternating that seems to work out great. We've kind of found some of the people that, especially women, that go down to a lower fat and a higher protein may do good with building muscle and stuff like that, but they may have some issues hormonally. And there's a lot of reasons that luteinizing hormones, certain things there that they can have more of an issue with than men. So if they do that, it tends to it can cause some problems, and we've seen that. And so by adding in some of that higher fat days, I'm talking about instead of just in terms of meat, like you're looking at lean ground beef, very lean steak cuts like sirloin or something like that, or filet mignon on the higher protein leaner days, and then on the higher fat days, you're looking at more ribeyes, steak, butter, ghee. And so we alternate those. That seems to kind of keep the hormones in check and keeps the protein where it needs to be.
Yeah, that seems quite applicable to what I do with a lot of clients as well. It's not always like a one size fits all thing. Not everyone's going from upping protein to super high amounts, upping fats. It's usually one or the other based on your individual circumstances. Can you speak on perhaps how one or the other might be more useful than the other?
Yeah, I mean, as far as going in a lower approach to the fat and a higher protein.
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, when people are starting on a carnivore way of eating, it seems like if they come into this as I did with autoimmune issues or other health issues, seems like for the healing effect, the higher fat definitely works better. People that have, mental, emotional issues going on there, depression, whatever, it definitely seems like the higher fat is more, I would call it more of a healing type effect. Those that come into it that are metabolically healthy, they probably do better or just as well when they go with a much higher protein aspect of it. And higher protein, I mean, everybody goes, what are you talking about macros? If we're leaving out all carbohydrates, which I do, most of my clients keep it very low to zero. is, I mean, on a higher protein day, you're looking at maybe getting, 50, 60% of your macros from protein. Now, generally on a higher fat day, I'm getting anywhere from 70 to, over 80% of my macros from fat. And again, that is not a one size fits all. That's why we have to change this for each approach. Now, again, if people don't know my history, I came into this way of eating with the background of autoimmune issues, gut issues. I had severe gut problems and hard time digesting food and everything. And in the past, I did a very high protein approach, lower fat. I did that for 2 months, and it was an abysmal failure for me. But again, that just speaks for myself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not one thing or the other isn't going to work for everyone. I get frustrated sometimes because people like myself, Mark, and a lot of others are trying to put out useful information, but they can take things out of context. So that's why I was very specific with my question. Because a lot of people will follow, the 80-20 approach, or they'll follow like the anabolic diet, which is more high protein with less fat. There's loads of ways you can look at it. And for myself, I mean, I can do a high protein approach and get very lean very fast. Then sometimes it's not appropriate for me. My body won't let me. So I have probably similar issues to Mark where my gut won't deal with it very well. My digestion will just suffer.
Yes.
So it's not going to be a long-term approach for me if I'm going to do something like that.
Now, do you generally mix it up or do you stay on one approach?
I tend to mix it up based on the results that I want. I find high protein, low fat does get me into shape very, very fast. Then I feel much better, as in cognitively, training strength-wise, I feel better using a higher fat approach. Then it kind of makes me think, like you said, maybe it's a case of mixing up sometimes. Maybe it's that I sort of err on one side or the other, depending on what result I want. Then I might use like a refeed day where I do high fat with moderate protein. And that's when you're running flat, when you don't sleep, when your training's rubbish, your recovery's rubbish. So, yeah, there's lots of things to look at. And one thing I do notice a lot as well is people also swap diets around very quickly. I mean, have you experienced that yourself with coaching people? Was it that they one thing for 2 days, another then?
Yeah. And that's one thing I really try to, as far as doing total ways of eating and switching from here to here. I mean, there's got to be a washout period. I mean, before you can't just go from one way of eating for a couple of months and then switch to a totally different way of eating and go, well, I did this and did that. I mean, there seems to be a washout period in between, because those results are going to be hard to measure if it's just a few weeks you did this and a few weeks you did this. So I think it's better to stay on a very similar way of eating. It doesn't have to be exactly like we said. We can change around the fat and the protein macros. But if you just go from, well, I'm going to eat this to this, and you're back and forth, I think that's kind of like the same analogy on training. You'll have people that they're going to go do this one day, and they're going to do something else totally different. Not saying you can't have complementary ways of training, but sometimes they can contradict each other. And again, most people that are into the working out, they tend to do way too much and too often. And I think that hampers the results more than anything. But yeah, you need to have some consistency for sure.
Made another brilliant point there about doing too much. And I find that very often with people that come from strictly speaking, a bodybuilding background. I mean, I used to train probably 20 hours a week, including all my physical exercises, sports, all that stuff, weight training. I do all of it. And I was finding times I was very young, recover, and I could get away with anything. But nowadays, it's not working. A lot of people that I take on are people that are perhaps training too much, maybe 6 days a week for an hour and a half, doing 30 to 40 sets per body part. And I think I'm doing about a third of what you're doing. And I'm still relatively in good shape. You could be missing something here. But part of it is the approach you have to give them. So what advice would you give to the person that's watching this that might be, overtraining, doing a lot, but perhaps they're not recognizing that it's making their health and physique crumble?
Yeah, and I run into that all the time. I'll have people that have trained elsewhere or trained in different programs, And when I tell them, I think you're doing too much, and they always think it's more and more and more and more. And you kind of get in this paradigm where you always think with anything else, it's better to have more money. It's better to have more land. It's better to have more cars and, more and more and more. And, that if we use that analogy on medicine, I mean, is it better if the doctor prescribed you an antibiotic, he said, take this, twice a day. Well, if you go with that analogy, well, let me just take the whole bottle today, and that's not always the case. So, you have to understand that there is a connection. It's a yin and yang, you're going to call it that, between working out and recovery. And if you're just all the time going all out and all the time, you're never going to get your full genetic potential reached. You never will. You may get good results, but your results could be way better. Again, we could go back to Dorian Yates. I mean, Dorian Yates back in the late 80s and the early 90s, he was always consistently like number 2 to number 3. And he was working as a typical bodybuilder. And then by happenstance, he ran into Mike MENTZER in an LA gym, and he said, Mike, I need some help. I can't, beat this person. I can't beat this person and this person. And I'm doing more and more and more. And he said, have you ever thought about doing less? And he said, well, that doesn't make sense. He said, well, I think you could have more intensity. So I'm working out, I don't know, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours a day. And he said, no, more intensity. He said, that's the opposite of going long. So you can either work out long or you can work out hard, but you cannot do both. And so, he had him go down to where he was doing the consolidated routine of where he was doing 2 different exercises in a session, and then two more exercises later on in a session. And that's when it was seven-time Mr. O after that. And he still, continued with that type of very abbreviated training. And so again, he tried, volume, and kept adding volume and kept adding volume and adding this and adding that. And it was kind of revolutionary for him to say, have you thought of doing the opposite? Well, most of us are that way too, especially if you, again, we've said this before, if you read all the magazines or get on there, it's always, hey, this new program somebody is doing, you need to add this and this and this and this. But many times I'll have people, okay, let's just take, before you start training with me, let's just take 2 weeks off. And they're like, oh my goodness, I'm just going to lose all muscle. You're not going to lose your muscle. What you lose, you'll gain back if you do lose much of any. And let's just start a fresh approach, and we're going to keep this very consolidated. We're going to keep this very on track, and we're going to start monitoring certain things, HRV being one of them, how your sleep is, how everything else is going mentally, emotionally. And we see signs of overtraining. If I see that, we're going to cut back, either take some volume, or we're going to give you a little less frequent workout, a little infrequency on there. And so that's a hard concept for people to get. I mean, it just seems like you always want to do more. I'm the same way. I mean, I get in that and I'll find myself overtrained and I'll be in denial. I'll go, oh, no, I'm good. And then I'll take a break or I'll deload a little bit and I come back, have better appearance body-wise, strength level, feel better. So it is hard to get that. It's just a hard concept to understand.
I completely agree. I mean, I had an experience today where I was training in the gym and I did 11 total sets. And my usual amount is a rough guess between 15 and 20 when I'm physically, when I've got my full capacity.
Yeah.
I did. Because I've got my phone here right now. I can look at my notepad and I've got, I believe, 5 sets here, which were taken to muscular failure. But I use cluster sets, so like a rest pause method. I actually didn't finish my workout because I couldn't see how I was going to recover from it. So I thought, I'm going to stop it there. I didn't trim my biceps, didn't trim triceps, but I got my chest, shoulders, and back worked out a little bit.
Yeah.
I had a great workout. I look back and think, yeah, I probably could have done the arms, spent an extra half an hour, but that would have took a toll on my recovery. I need longer to rest. I probably wouldn't have put my all into it because I was so messed up from that level.
Absolutely. That's being very wise to understand and acknowledge that.
I mean, how many sets are you doing at the moment for your training? Obviously, you're in a different kind of phase than me. You're focused more on strength and that kind of thing. Do you have a perimeter of sets you do? Is it like you do 5 to 10 a session or something like that?
Well, no, actually, I do 1 set to failure. And the only thing that would be different, again, since I train myself and I don't have anybody to assist, I don't have machines that would allow me to do some of these things to go to failure safely. If I can't do that, I may go to near failure and then do a rest pause, which is just a short, a very few second pause, and then just let the muscles recharge enough that I can get an extra few reps. I will do negative onlys when I can. Sometimes I'll do that, but I generally keep it just one set to failure or as full of failure as I can safely go on the equipment that I have at hand at the moment.
Yeah, key point here is safely. So when Mark says he's doing one set, and people watch this and think, oh, it's load of nonsense, he's not doing one set. I mean, he's built a tremendous physique with very little volume, but that volume that he is doing is maximized. So like you say, he's doing doing negatives. Anyone that's done a set to failure and they've not been able to, for example, squat of some sort, would be you have a piece of equipment that allows you to go right down and rack it. When you can't get up again, your muscles will be sore. You can't empty the tank any further. So it's definitely an effective method if you can do it safely. So that's the key point Mark just said as well, safety.
Safely. And most people that think they went to failure haven't. I see it all the time. Oh yeah, I went to failure. They didn't go to failure. And it's not fun. It's not pleasant. And if we go, well, boy, I felt that burn when I was at failure. It goes past the burn. I mean, the burn is not failure. It's when you basically cannot make another contraction. Now, the key thing is doing it safely and also in good form. I could say we're just doing, curls. Well, I could do a curl to failure. Here I'm up here, struggling to get it, and I may keep contracting, but it's not going up. Now, obviously, I can put a little, body English and lean my back and get that, but that's not in good form unless I was doing cheek curls. But we're just talking about regular curls, and that's a good way to visualize this. So, you don't want to do any of these that hit a preconceived number or where you want to go, but you want to get to where you cannot go. You cannot make another contraction. And that's painful. And a lot of people have a very, very hard time pushing themselves to that limit because, you're squeezing everything you got out and you can't get any more. So a lot of times if we're doing a seated row and I'm pulling back and I can't even really get that next one back, I'll just hold right here. My arms are just shaking like this and I'll hold until I can no longer hold and it starts going down, and I try to go as slowly as possible. And again, on our lifting or pushing phase, the positive movement, concentric movement, that's your weakest of all your phases. Your holding movement is your second strongest, and then by far your negative phase. So there is some safety built into that. Like on a row is a good example of that. You can pull back and you can reach that positive failure, and then you can drain it, and you only have a little bit of holding left. And then once the holding is gone, it's going down, and you can keep it. And it's not just like boom, it's down. It's like slowly under control. And so that's one of the beauty of this is when you go into a high intensity training type style, it's very brief and less frequent than most other higher volume approaches.
Another thing I noticed as well is I've got a friend called Jerome Armstrong who'll probably be watching this when it live streams, live premieres, and he trains a lot of elderly clients, and people are 70, 80 years old. He's telling me how he got this lady to do forced reps, 81 years old, and she did it safely. So it is possible. It's something that anyone can do.
Yes.
And within, you just got to recognize your own body's limits. And another good point actually about how you, for example, you do the concentric portions, the lifting portion. When you can't really move any further forward, you do a static pause. You hold it for as long as you can. It might be that you're there for 5, 6, 7 seconds sometimes. Then your body will resist it. Then you think, oh, that's usually the point when people drop it. So you'll see them doing a shoulder press, they'll just drop it. That's the point that you want to be able to hold it and think, right, this is going to spend 5 seconds here holding it. I want to spend the next however long it takes until you can't even move it again. And that's how someone is going to be able to apply the one set to failure kind of method.
Yes.
Very effective.
Yeah, that only works if you take it to full failure or at least near failure on the things that you can't safely do in good form. And again, that's why it's not for everybody. Because some people just cannot push themselves, and they really do probably need a trainer to do it. In my opinion, I've seen very, very, very few people, except for a few sick individuals like myself, that can actually go to each full failure, most will go nowhere near it. And I've had clients tell me, okay, I'm at failure. I said, no, let's go a little more. I've got you here. And, they'll get 3 or 4 more reps out when they thought they already hit failure, and they were nowhere close to failure. And those last reps are the most productive. I mean, the reps that and that's what people don't understand. Your safest reps and your most productive reps are your last ones, the ones that you can just barely get when you're struggling with everything you got to get it out. Those are your most productive. That's when the magic happens. And how many people leave it on the table? They don't even go near them. They're stopping 60% short of what that is. And that's why many people will never, ever reach their even close to their full genetic potential, is they're not working hard enough. And they think that sweat, getting a ton of reps and a ton of sets is what it takes, and that's all that matters. And that's not. It's the amount of work you're doing. And if you're not getting that level, high effort of intensity, you're leaving a lot on the table that you're never going to get.
Makes total sense. What we'll do is we'll leave this here, and we'll leave it for round 4. I think we'll probably answer any of the questions that we've had so far. Before, incredible, wasn't it? Yeah, it's been great. Thanks very much for your time, Mark. I appreciate that.
I really enjoyed it. I hope this helps people, and I think a lot of this needs to get out there, and maybe they can get away from some of these crazy programs that they've never heard of, some of these different things they could do to actually help get there and get there quicker and safer.
Yeah, brilliant. Cheers for that. Take care.
You too. Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate it.